What's up, y'all? You're watching Union Minded. I'm your host, Eric, and today we're going to read an excerpt from a book that I'm reading called There's Power in a Union. It's by Richard Dre, and it covers labor's history from the beginning of the industrial age, from the beginning of America. And I come across a segment today that, not today, actually yesterday, and it was an interesting segment, and I thought I'd bring it to you guys. And the reason for this is because I never got labor history in school, not really. And so, since I never got it, I assume most of you who come across my videos probably never got it either. And so, as it informed me and made me go, wow, I think it'll do the same for you. Anyway, this is an excerpt from There's Power in a Union. All right, here we go. The ILGWU, founded in 1900, had both male and female members. In New York, the men were skilled fabric cutters and tailors who belonged to Local 10. The women, shirtwaist or blouse makers, were members of Local 25. The factories that employed these workers varied greatly in size, from large enterprises with hundreds on the payroll to small 3- and 4-person businesses. Given the seasonal nature of fashion retailing and the modest overhead needed to manufacture clothes, many garment businesses consisted of little more than a few sewing machines and a pile of fabric occupying part of a tenement apartment. I lost my spot. There it is. The industry itself was highly specialized and competitive to the point of being cutthroat. A factory might be charged with manufacturing a single accessory, such as a zipper or a collar for a particular garment. The smaller enterprises often subcontracted work from larger mechanized factories. Thus, a manufacturing entity might spring into existence solely to meet the demands of a particular fashion season. It was the jury-rigged pay system and Byzantine subcontracting practices within the shops that accounted for the names by which these places were known. Sweatshops. You guys have heard of sweatshops, right? You've heard that term before, right? Sweatshops. I always assumed that they called them sweatshops because they were hot and just nasty places to work where you're just constantly sweating. Let's find out. The term was not a reference to the temperature in the workplace. In parentheses here it says, although in the summer that may have been appropriate. That's the end of the parentheses. But rather, the management practice of sweating labor, assigning specific jobs on lots of garments to ever smaller shops or units within the same factory. Manufacturing costs were sweated downward, as at each lower level, small shop owners, floor supervisors, and the workers themselves negotiated and renegotiated wages and production deadlines. This system pertained throughout the New York garment industry, leaving many workers vulnerable in regard to wage and due to the fluctuations in demand with little job security. So left them vulnerable for wages and job security. Can you imagine having to negotiate your rate of pay every day with your boss? Every day it just changes based on whatever garment is being asked for. That's a crazy system to live under. Conditions, even in the larger factories, were far from ideal. Now we're going to talk about working conditions, and it really stood out. Hours of work were typically 8 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. with a half hour for lunch and possibly a half day on Saturday. Salaries ranged from $8 to $13 per week, with the smaller shops often paying on a piece rate system that had the effect of pressuring employees to work fast and stay late. I remember when I was working for Trulin back in the day, they used to always ask your footage at the end of the day. How many feet did you install today in EMT? And I always be like, man, why are you sitting here tracking my footage like this? It always felt like it was like one of those deals where they're trying to see who's putting in the most conduit and whatnot. At least as a worker, that's how it felt. On the management side, that's probably not what it was about at all, but that's how it felt as a worker. And it was very annoying. And they would come around at the end of the day. How much foot did you put in? How many feet did you put in? I used to hate that. Anyway, let us continue. On a piece rate system that had the effect of pressuring employees to work fast and stay late. Workers were routinely charged for their needles and thread that they used. Imagine that. They charged them for the needles and the threads, the material and the tools that they needed to make the garments they were selling. They were charged to the workers. And for electricity. Wow. Some shops expected them to provide their own sewing machine. That's like those shop rockets that bring the power tools to work. Because, you know, it helps me be faster. It helps me be, I don't have to worry about looking for a drill. I have it in my bag. Oh, can you imagine? Bring your own sewing machine. Seamstresses were crowded in so tightly they worked literally back to back. The work areas were poorly heated and ventilated. Bathroom breaks were discouraged. My God. Bathroom breaks were discouraged or forbidden. And there were myriad rules and a system of fines for tardiness, absenteeism, and other infractions such as smoking or excessive talking. Excessive talking. No talking while you work. Verbal and physical abuse was not uncommon. Workers also complained of routine condescension, sexual touching, and harassment. There was no grievance system, and complaining about unfair practices could get one not only fired from one firm, but blacklisted from the trade completely. No wonder the women, as had their forebears in the textile mills of New England, referred to their situation as slavery. About 50% of the workers were Russian Jews, and other 35% were Italian. The Lower East Side, where most of the garment business was concentrated, was by 1905 both the most crowded residential area in the United States and the world's largest center of Jewish population. It was, not surprisingly, also a stew pot of intellectual and activist thought. For these immigrants, many of whom had some familiar connection with political or labor agitation in the old world, the nascent labor movement in the garment industry was a vehicle for assimilation in their adopted land. This is a quote. The trade union became to the Jews, one historian has said, what urban politics had long been for the Irish. In the warm summer of 1909, the young seamstresses, grown impatient with their subjugation in the garment shops, finally rebelled. The strike originated at Rosen Brothers, a company that sweated labor by hiring contractors that's to manufacture its clothes based on the firm's designs and patterns. The contractors worked inside the factory. This is a factory with a bunch of contractors working inside of it. Each contractor subcontracted to do a different part of the garment. Paying and supervising their own hires. So imagine the differences in wages between everyone that had to work there. This arrangement allowed Rosen Brothers to not only cut labor costs to the bone, but distance themselves from those who sewed and stitched on their premises. The trouble started when negotiations soured on the basic piece rate between Rosen Brothers and its inside contractors. So the trouble started when the building owners, the Rosen Brothers, got into a beef with the contractors, not with the girls that were working with the garments, but the contractors about the piece rate, okay? So the owners of the building got too greedy for the contractors. Now let's continue. The trouble started when negotiations soured on the basic piece rate between Rosen Brothers and its inside contractors, who had little difficulty convincing the workers that a declining piece rate was not in their interest either. Both contractors and workers then walked out together. Easy to convince the workers as you're getting screwed, and now you need allies. You go to the workers and say, hey, if they screw me, guess what I'm gonna do to you? The ILGWU led a 5-week stoppage that forced Rosen Brothers to recognize the union, establish a shop floor grievance committee, and grant a 20% rate increase. Encouraged by what had occurred, workers struck two of the city's other larger clothing factories, the Triangle Shirtwaist Company and Leeserson's. And I'm going to stop it right there. They gained off of their 5-week stoppage a shop floor grievance committee, 20% rate increase, and the Rosen brothers recognized their union. And that was off of just a 5-week work stoppage. And then they inspired other factories to do the same. But it was interesting, as I was reading that, it's mad interesting because you look at the working conditions. Working all those hours with 1 half-hour break. Bathroom breaks were frowned upon. And I remember working for some unbearable people. And they were like that. They were like little tyrants. And it's in this little set of kingdoms that we've allowed to develop over time here. You got little kingdoms. You got the kingdom of Walmart, the kingdom of Amazon, you know, the kingdom of all these corporations, and they run like that because you're just cogs in a machine. And some managers, some foremen, some people let a little bit of power get to their head and they go cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. You should look up the Stanford experiment, I think it's called. Stanford did something where they put some students in a mock jail situation, and some students were COs and some students were inmates. And literally, these students who were Ivy League students became their roles. And it's just wild to see how we got to where we are. And you read these history books and you're like, holy smokes. A little bit of power for them foremen, they lose it. Become little tyrants like they're little kings. Anyway, I hope you found this interesting. My name is Eric. You're watching Union Minded. Remember, the fight's not left and right, it's up and down. It's going to take class solidarity to win always. Each one teach one, get out there and reach one. And there can be no union without you and I, front and center. Peace.